Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner. I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Meredith Hama-Brown, an actor and filmmaker whose first feature, Seagrass, stars Ali Mackey and Luke Roberts as struggling parents whose trip to a counseling retreat exposes further fractures in their family. It's a terrific picture, and its TIFF premiere last year kicked off a wonderful festival run that led to a slot in Canada's top 10 last month, and an American premiere at the Santa Barbara Film Festival just last week. It's opening across North America this Friday, February 23rd, and in Toronto you can see it at the TIFF Lightbox, where Meredith and cinematographer Norm Lee will be joining me for a Q&A at the 2:30 p.m. show on Sunday the 25th. You should come. Meredith picked The Red Shoes, the 1948 backstage drama from Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger, better known as The Archers. It's the tale of Victoria Page, a promising ballerina who finds herself torn between Boris Lermontov, a producer determined to shape her talent in a way that serves his vision, and only his vision, and Julian Craster, a composer bent on perfection at any cost. Also, there's a pair of ballet shoes that can make Victoria dance perfectly, at a terrible cost. Laura Shearer, Anton Walbrook, and Marius Goring play out this toxic creative triangle within a magnificent, slightly stylized world created by production designer Hank Heckroth and the legendary cinematographer Jack Cardiff, and Powell and Pressburger bring it all to rich, pulsing life. In a word, it's art. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Yeah, I think The Red Shoes is just a film that I find really fascinating. And it's something that I didn't watch until maybe a year ago. Oh. And since then, I've now seen it 3 times. I just find it to be like really full of a lot of interesting complexities. And I do kind of find these older 1940s films really intriguing in the sense that in many ways they're so outdated and sometimes they're still super relevant. And I just love to kind of see, how that plays out through a modern perspective. There's something that's really interesting to me also about the fact that it's a fable within a ballet, within a film. I find that really fascinating, and I'm sure we'll dive in more to kind of the ballet especially, but I think it's a really intriguing segment in the film and something I really love as well.
Oh yeah. What made you, I'm just really curious, why last year? What made you catch it all of a sudden? How did you catch up to it?
It's weird because it's known to be kind of, it's in all of these lists of 100 best films ever. And I think I was just looking for something to watch one day. And I was like, okay, it's time. It's time to see this. I very much enjoyed it, found it to be such a strange film. And I think I'm really drawn to strange things. It definitely fulfilled that for me.
Oh, I'm so glad you got to come to it as an adult, though, and bring in all the things that you've acquired over, like the experience, the knowledge that we accrue over life. I saw it in 92 or 94, maybe, whenever the Criterion Laserdisc came out.
Right.
And it was great, but I was in my 20s. And yeah. I know I responded to it just on the most base level of, this is a story about somebody being mean to somebody else. Like, I didn't.
Yeah. And you're like, that's not nice. Yeah. But it would be so, I've been reading kind of about different people's perspectives on the film, of course. And it's really interesting hearing about some people who watched it as a child and grew up watching it even, and how their perspective on the film became more complex over time. And of course, watching it as an adult, I don't have that. I just have my adult perspective. So it's interesting to think about, like, how would I have seen this as a child? Because it is very much like a fable. Like you said, it's kind of about these kind of core feelings of, oh, this person is being a bully. But I think probably watching it as an adult, you see sort of that it does in many ways also stray away from that simplicity in a lot of ways through the characters. Like, Lermontov could easily be seen as a villain, but in some ways he has these moments of kindness, or where you see a softer side to him. Like when he decides to, he's debating about whether he should keep Vicky under contract, and he ultimately feels he can't do it. And then you see Julian, who seems like this total sweetheart, but then we see later on that he's really just as controlling as Lermontov. So I think that's kind of maybe the perspective that as an adult, we start to, that an adult might see a bit more clearly.
Yeah, I was thinking about, someone like Martin Scorsese seeing this as a kid, and ingesting it like a Disney film. Right. Like where it's all primary colors and primal feeling and emotion. And I'm sure he saw it clearly. He speaks of it over and over again as a formative text, right? Even though he's never made a movie. Even New York, New York doesn't look like a Powell and Pressburger film. It's still him doing his own thing. He's never made a movie like it, but you can feel its heart running through so much stuff that he's done. And the sense I had was like I was receiving a classic that the Criterion brand was telling me this was a really important work. And I liked Powell and Pressburger, what I'd seen of them, but I'd never managed to see The Red Shoes in a theater or anything like that, or on television. And so coming to it as this mandated piece of culture, I think I was also in my mid-20s, and I was my back was up at a lot of the idea that this was received wisdom, but it won me over. I still don't think I understood its complexities until about 15 years later, but you can boil it down to art versus life the way that the way the Wikipedia does, but the way that and the way the characters constantly discuss it, the philosophies that are thrown back and forth in this love triangle. But that was the thing that struck me most on the most recent rewatch when the 4K disc came out, I think 2 years ago. The life of the mind that is happening for all three characters who live in their heads in ways that actually interfere with their physical lives, with their practical lives. And since Vicky is she's a dancer, but she also lives to be around artists and keeps putting herself in positions where maybe she's going to be exploited for her talent, but she'll be exploited by masters of the art. So it's worth it. And that's the push-pull that I didn't even really notice the first time. I mean, I just sort of dismissed it going through as, oh yeah, well, that's a story about artists being pretentious and fussing over what's truly important. And now that I've got some years on me, I think art is all we have. And I sort of get it. I definitely empathize with Victoria way more than I had beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's interesting how, early on in the film, Lermontov asks Vicky, why do you dance? And she says, why do you live? And I think that really kind of sums up. And then as the film progresses, she evolves as a person and gains this new sense of life. But it's almost like her reason for being is art. And for someone, her partner, to try to, take that away from her is very cruel as well, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He keeps saying he wants what's best for her. And I kind of believe him. I mean, I certainly believe Julian more than I believe Lermontov.
I don't know, like when I think they're both kind of assholes, but like,
sure. Yeah.
But like, I get what you're saying for sure. Cause Julian is certainly easier to like, but what I find most intriguing, one of the things I find most intriguing about the film is the themes around power and control. And also like the themes around being a woman, which is very complex. And I've been reading a lot of articles about it just to kind of wrap my head around it. But one of the things, coming back to, we can get back to that after, but around power and control is watching it this last time, I was like, Julian at the end, he's being so manipulative. And it's interesting when he goes into her change room and says, I can't even live without you. And she doesn't repeat that back. He's not really actually seeing her. He's not really seeing her at all. And I think that's really kind of interesting because a part of me thinks that she was happier when she had dance than she had the relationship. You see their married life and it doesn't really look all that great. So it's like, if she can't have the things that she needs most in life, she would never be happy in that relationship. And he's truly failing to see that. And his career could have kept going. And just because he's willing to let it go doesn't mean she wants to, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, both Lermontov and Julian are controlling. I think the difference is that Lermontov knows he's being controlling and Julian thinks he's being a good guy, which makes him more interesting, right? But still just as much of a villain as far as Victoria is concerned. And then
absolutely,
whether the shoes are evil is almost irrelevant. Like the curse of the red shoes bleeding into life as opposed to just something that, you know, is a harmless superstition that helps her focus or perform. The fact that that's left ambiguous while everything else is concrete, like the damage that the people do to one another, the damage that humans do to one another is so much more profound than the damage that an object might do.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think, you know, everyone is sort of like, oh, was it the shoes or was it her committing, you know, a fully conscious suicide or being driven to that by these two kind of controlling men? And yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't really matter, does it? Because it is so much about everything else. And in a sense, I think sometimes metaphors in films, like they should almost be read as both. Like, you know, the power of the red shoes, if it is the red shoes, is truly representational of what it represents. So it's like, it's both, right? The red shoes equals all of these things.
Yeah, it's something Vicky can fixate on, but I don't think that you can assign it blame. I mean, it's funny too, because of course this is a movie that was released in 1948, just after the war, where everything had portent and everything was symbolic and meaningful. And it was just the narrative style of the time too, right? If you make a movie about art, you're going to use these big splashy metaphors and symbols. And the strength of Powell and Pressburger, I think, is that they could always translate symbolic metaphoric constructs into something immediate and powerful. I mean, like the way A Matter of Life and Death is maybe the most beautiful fantasy of death ever constructed, I think, because it's so British, because it's so understated, right? Like they're the cultural tendency towards downplaying anything meaningful and you know, putting up a I don't know, straighten up and fly right. That's not the right phrase, but keeping calm and carrying on, all these things, the ways to repress trauma that are culturally ingrained in the English. And here you just have, as with Tales of Hoffmann, you just have people's hearts bursting out of them in this massive expression that can only happen through dance, through the ballet. But the characters are using the ballet as the excuse to explode just as much as the actors are using the project. And
the directors.
Yeah. So you're in this heightened world from the jump, but it's also, it has its own rules, right? Like the rules of performance keep coming in and informing the actors' performances as their characters. It's a hall of mirrors in the most fascinating British way.
Yeah. And speaking of Hall of Mirrors, I think that something that really stands out to me in the film is, of course, the ballet sequence, which I think has so many, you know, the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, I'm seeing this beautiful ballet sequence. And what stood out most on first watch was just how subjective it becomes. You know, it's certainly not based in realism. And I found that very intriguing. And then watching it the next couple of times, I was just, you know, really interested in how it parallels the real characters' lives, how it mirrors, but also foreshadows, but not really in as much of a straightforward way as you might think. Like, you know, on one hand, it seems like the shoemaker is Lermontov, the lover is Julian. And to me, that also very much represents like the angel and devil on her shoulder. And you really see that in the kind of climactic scene where they're both literally, it feels like on her shoulders, you know, sort of trying to sway her towards their direction. But what's so interesting is that one part where they superimpose over the shoemaker, Lermontov's image and then Julian's image. And it's like, you know, because a part of me when I watch the film, I'm like, is this like just something where from a current day perspective, we're seeing that they're both being controlling, but the filmmakers were kind of like, no, like Julian's actually the good guy. But I think there's definitely some clear cues in the film that show that it is very much intentional. And that's one of them for me, where it's like, no, they know they're in on it as well. Because a part of me was just like, this is just like, what was expected of women of the time, that they'll just get married. And like, that's almost the virtuous choice from their perspective. And you see, in the ballet, the lover, and he's associated with the church. And like, yeah, I just find that to be an interesting way that they shook things up in the ballet.
Yeah, they, as filmmakers, that the layering they do with personal narratives, like for every character and motivation, and then bringing it all out in the abstract in a ballet sequence. It's amazing. It's remarkable too that I was raised on the MGM musicals with huge dance numbers, like Singing in the Rain and The Bandwagon, the films that just stop dead for 15 to 17 minutes. I think there's an Audrey Hepburn one too. Is it Funny Face? Where it's just like, we're only going to dance now. And
yeah, I love it.
They're great.
No problem with that.
Yeah, they're great. But the American ones never played out it's funny. They never dealt with the storylines they were spinning out. They were just like dropping in these ballets to show the audience what ballet looked like. And Powell and Pressburger used it to amplify and expand on narrative in a way that I just think like it felt like the MGM musicals weren't interested in it, that it was just a response to the Red Shoes, that this is, oh, you can do that. Okay, we're going to do that. We're going to make it the climax. We're going to give it's the big showstopper number. Even A Star Is Born, the 54 version with Mason and Garland has Born in a Trunk to end the first act, where you actually do sort of recap the movie you've seen in a stylistic way. And this film is just like, no, it's not subtext anymore. They're dancing the text.
Yeah.
And it's up to the audience to pay attention, which is so great.
Totally. It's like, let's just not have these rules. And I think it's interesting that there was actually quite a bit of criticism for the film about this. And I'm like, but that's the best part. Like, that's what's good about it. That's what's so interesting about it, is that they break these rules. Something else I find really interesting about the ballet and the film itself is I read the Hans Christian Andersen story, and it really is this cautionary tale about the evils of, in the story, the character's name is Karen instead of Vicky, and Karen is really vain. And she wants these red shoes. And it's, I'm sure there's a message around, female sexuality as well. But it's like she's very much portrayed as doing something wrong or bad. And in the end, she pays the ultimate price. Her feet are cut off. It's horrible. But what I find really interesting about the film, as well as probably the ballet, is that Vicky is not portrayed as someone who is doing something wrong or bad. And I think that's really central to, I think that's really like a really important part of the story, and I think it really does tie into sort of this way that the film views women. Like, on one hand, I think it's quite complex, because a very simple reading of it could be like, oh, if women follow their passions, they're going to be punished in this really horrible, violent way. But I think there's a lot more to it, in the sense that, like, really the men are the villains in this. Like, even after her groundbreaking performance, one of the ballet instructor asks her if her head is, if her head is getting blown up, or if she's feeling egotistical, and she says, no, not at all. And you can tell it's genuine. And I think that that's something that I think is a key to, like, the viewpoint of women in the story, is like, she's not wrong for doing this. We're sympathizing with her. We want her to succeed in both, if that's what she wants. And it's really just the men who are stopping her from this.
And it's only because they want her to do what they want her to do, right?
Yeah.
It's really
You could
that
have
simple.
both otherwise.
Yeah.
You
There's
know?
there's no integration of her life into theirs or her desires into theirs. Because I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in either case, there's the possibility for true collaboration, right? For a real partnership. And she just isn't given that option.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so that is definitely and then in the ballet too, I was kind of thinking like how does that translate to the ballet itself? Is it the same? Um and it's hard to say, but I really don't think the ballet shows the ballet's protagonist as in anything than being kind of joyful, right? Um so yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's the one time that she's purely happy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Both
Yeah.
Vicky and her character, if she has a character, whoever she's supposed to be in this ballet, that is a refraction of her own life.
Mm-hmm.
She hasn't yet hit the roadblocks that are coming.
Mm-hmm.
And she can just exist in the music in the moment on the stage.
Mm-hmm.
And Moira Shearer is just so joyful, so
Mm-hmm.
radiant in this.
Yeah.
And even as the character gains a more tortured affect over the course of the film, but you see the potential in this in a way that we're not allowed to see in the real, quote unquote, real world. And it's it's so instantly powerful. Immediately, just from the very beginning, you understand what's going on, where the film is taking us and taking her, and it's just radiant.
Yeah, and I think that is such a very important part as well, is that they cast ballet dancers over actors, and she happened to be able to act, but I think that is really central to why, as a viewer, we respect her and her journey so much. Is she's just so blatantly talented, and I think that really helps to demonstrate why we're all rooting for her. And why, like, she doesn't at all, of course, deserve this fate, like, that comes upon her in the end.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I spun up the new releases of Sofia Coppola's Priscilla from Elevation and Nia DaCosta's The Marvels from Disney, and I'm currently about halfway through Sony's latest Columbia Classics 4K Megaset, so you can look forward to that. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link in the Simcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. It's a melodrama, it's tragedy, I was sort of jokingly once said that it's their version of a woman's picture of the time, like where there cannot be a happy ending because that's just not what the genre demands, but they're inventing the genre here. There is a chance, there's a genuine sense that it might work out for most of the film, that if one piece falls right, if one decision could be made differently over and over and over again, we're given this hope. And it's, I think, because the Archers, Powell and Pressburger, were such optimistic filmmakers, especially, given where England was at the moment and how elegant their storytelling is. It feels like one of the few tragedies that is all the more tragic because it didn't have to be tragic. Like it's not a Stella Dallas where that whatever happens, she's going to walk away at the end, or in any one of a million tuberculosis movies that were happening around the same time. And I think that's why it endures, not just because it looks and sounds and feels like nothing else.
Yeah.
Except there are other ballet movies. There's the joke about somebody going to see Rocky for the 8th time, and somebody says, but you know how it ends. It's like, yeah, but maybe this time he wins. The Red Shoes has that effect on me when I watch it. I always forget it's a tragedy. I've seen it straight through now maybe 4 times over the years in pieces elsewhere, and it's just like, oh no, that's right, this doesn't work. It's heartbreaking.
It's one of those tragedies where for the first half, you really enjoy watching it. It's actually so beautiful and fun and alive, and you're excited for the characters. But yeah, and I think that's a really interesting part of the structure as well, is that it's so divided. It's almost like cut in half by the musical sequence. The first half is just pure joy and excitement, and we're moving with the characters towards their dreams. And then it's like the second half is just like, oh, never mind. Everything is going to go crashing down. And this person who's amazing is going to die.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really does a 180.
But in an artistically honest way. That's the thing, right? Like it earns the tragedy in a way that a lot of other films just, assume that that's where it's going to end up and predetermined. And yeah, what are you going to do? This one feels like loss. This one actually feels like you're watching someone be destroyed, which again, shouldn't be as ecstatic as it is. But it's the thing that, people are divided about Black Swan, for example, just for another story about a dancer who destroys herself. But yeah. It felt to me that Darren Aronofsky was having fun with the idea. There's a nihilistic glee in that movie and in Portman's performance and in this sort of bending reality thing that he does, where I don't think Darren Aronofsky makes movies with happy endings. It's fine. They're transcendent
beginnings.
Fair point. Yes, they're transcendent in different ways, though. But in this one, this is a movie about someone who doesn't need to die for art. But that's what happens.
Not at all. Because, that's a really interesting point, because in Black Swan, Natalie Portman's character is like, I never really feel like we see her living her passion or loving dancing. Do we? I'm trying to think back. But for me, when I think back to the film, I just think of the anxiety that it causes her the entire time and the pressure. And certainly that is a part of any artist's journey. It can be hard, and that's like, but hopefully the joy that you have while doing it balances that. And I think that, I don't think it's unrealistic in Black Swan either, because I think for a lot of artists, their journey is just pure pain, and at least at different times, right? And we're seeing that time where she's under a lot of pressure, and she's being asked to kind of raise the bar in a way that she doesn't know how. And I think that's a very valid part of an artist's journey. But in The Red Shoes, we really see how she can kind of move past that. Before doing the ballet, she's so nervous that she forgets her first step, but then she goes out, and it's not just that she excels, but she excels with joy, which is wonderful to see.
Yeah, the idea of work that sustains you as an artist is something that rarely gets. It's not sexy anymore, right? Like we've internalized. I think
you have
the
to
method,
struggle.
Yeah, well, I think the method really pushed that in, right? Or people have to struggle to be artists to find the real art. You have to maim yourself emotionally or physically and just push through. Like ballet dancers are destroying their bodies for this, but it doesn't have to be that way. And now it feels radical to suggest that maybe the thing you can do is enjoy the work. Which is like how we came around to that again. I have no idea.
Yeah. We need to find our way back to that, I think.
Yeah. Well, the happiest people in the arts that I know are people who do the thing that they love, but don't need to torture themselves about it. And the art can be, it's like we've just done an episode of Midnight Cowboy, and the story of Dustin Hoffman putting rocks in his shoes so he could walk with a proper limp as Ratso Rizzo. It's like, I get it. I understand it, but also you can fake that. Like there is a way, and
don't mess up your feet.
Yeah. And he incorporates a gait that feels natural. And by the middle of the movie, you don't think about it anymore. And I'm hoping that the stories of the rocks was just like for one day to figure it out. So he doesn't, do real damage to himself. But the idea that somehow, that people confuse most acting with best acting, and that the idea of showing people just how much suffering you're doing. Daniel Day-Lewis can learn to go off and make shoes for a role, and I don't think anybody gets hurt in the process.
Yeah. But or didn't Leonardo DiCaprio eat like
the beef liver thing?
Like alive? I don't know.
Something. Yeah. I don't. I thought he was a vegan. Maybe it was vegan liver.
Well,
But
anything for the role.
well, but that's it,
Yeah.
right? And then that fuels the next person who internalizes that and decides that he's going to go, I don't know, maybe I'll numb my foot with Novocaine for a day so I can limp convincingly. And
Yeah.
and I'm sure someone's done it, right? Like I just actually no, that's not true. If someone had done it, we'd know about it because that's part of the story. But the idea that, you can assemble people to make a movie about art that doesn't require them to
be in
wallow
pain.
in misery. Yeah. I mean, The Red Shoes is a sad film in the end, but I don't get this feeling that it was anything but joyous on set, that these people were making something that they knew would be genuinely precious.
Absolutely. And even the way that art is portrayed in the film, I mean, of course, coming back to the fact that we see Vicky's character just truly loving what she does, but really the stress, like the real stress and pain in the movie does not come from anything to do so much with the art. It really comes from these toxic interpersonal relationships because yes, to a certain point, there will always be someone who pushes you like Lermontov, but it's really the extent that he does it. And, he validates that as saying, oh, but like, this is the best, like, this is the best ballet company. And who knows? I mean, we don't know. We don't see other ballet productions, but it does seem like maybe there's some truth to that because she truly agrees with it and misses it. But aside from that, it's really just these people wanting to control her that actually creates the pain. It's not her stress. It's not her rising to the challenge. Like, we see her struggle a bit, but that's not true pain. That's pushing oneself to become better, right? And it's very much shown to be that.
Yeah, and it is helping. Like, it does help her. The stress that she puts on herself is the thing that purifies her art.
Yes.
But no one notices it. I think that's the other thing. They just see the performance. They don't see the suffering. And so,
exactly.
And Julian can later make a big show of saying, I understand what you do and it hurts you and I want you to stop so we can have a normal life together. But she seems to be okay with it. Like, she's not, once she's found that engine, she doesn't go back to punishing herself. Like, that's the most radical break from the sort of stricture of this genre that we always see, where you just have to keep going to more. It's the Black Swan thing. You just have to go to more and more extreme lengths in order to get the thing. But once you know how to do it, you can do it. And that's what should be good. Yeah. That's what this movie is arguing for, a sense of acknowledgement that the work can be done, and then
that you can grow.
Yeah.
And you can be empowered.
You can build on the foundation rather than destroy yourself. It's the reverse. Like, it's the metaphor of the sculptor chipping away at the marble to find the art inside. And it's like, well, no. She did the other thing. She built the art on top of herself, and now she is more of a person. She's fulfilled instead of hollowed out.
Exactly. Because that's a really good point about comparing it there with Black Swan as well, because she's pushing and pushing and pushing, and then after the ballet, it's really smooth sailing in terms of what she's doing. She's a sensation. She's not stressed anymore as far as we can see. Everything is going extremely well. And I think, isn't that a beautiful way to show art and artists, is that you can kind of, you push yourself, but at some point you can get to a place where you actually feel good and can just be in the flow of what you're doing. And you're right, a lot of films don't show art that way. They show it more in the sense that it will tear you apart, basically.
Yeah. What was it Cassavetes said? It was the constant forge, where you're forever burning yourself in order to purify or find the steel or find the molten emotion. I'm sure I'm butchering the
I get the point, though.
but you recognize it, right? And and we all know people or we've all seen people rather, who have bought into that too heavily and done damage, not necessarily physically, but to their instrument.
Yeah. And I do think, probably artists, like, it's good to always grow. You don't really finish evolving until you're done. But there must be plateaus at some point, right? There's got to be, or like, I mean, not for everyone. I'm sure a lot of people don't, find that because maybe they want to always just continually push. And I think that's admirable in some ways, but I think there's also something beautiful about the idea that you push to a certain level and then you explore what is there, and then you push to the next level and then explore what is there. Um, because yeah, there must be something so exhausting and maybe less artistic about just this kind of constant need to one up, or like to I don't know, push yourself at least in a painful way as an artist.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Powell and Pressburger's work, and you see the waves that they worked in,
Mm-hmm.
the sort of
Yeah.
realist, kind of magic realist thing that they were doing with movies
Mm-hmm.
like I Know Where I'm Going, and then there's the full on, fully designed artifice of the Red Shoes and Colonel Blimp and Tales of Hoffman, and then ultimately Powell ends his career not intentionally, just because with Peeping Tom, and just
Yeah.
runs into the brick wall of making a film that was too psychologically realistic and acute. I mean, for 1960, it's obviously not it's dated considerably in its performance styles and its approach, but it's such a remarkable break from what he had been doing
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like he was pushing his limitations, like he was trying to see how far he could go, and he went too far for
Too
the
far.
world he was in. The movie's great.
Right.
I mean, it's a
Mhm.
perfect, it's like the British equivalent of Psycho. It is a story about a murderer that's told not sympathetically but empathetically. So you're with this killer,
Okay.
who uses his camera's tripod to impale women and
Oh my
film them
God,
at
I
the same
haven't seen
time.
this
Oh, you
one.
haven't seen it? Yeah, yeah.
I'll have to watch it.
Not a spoiler, horribly enough. That's fairly early on. They establish his MO.
That's the first 10 minutes. Yeah.
Kind of, but it's a really interesting character study
Yeah.
that plays like a horror movie. I mean, it was a horror movie in 1960, and it's relatively bloodless because, of course, it was for 1960.
Right.
It's this almost 65-year-old movie that understands where the audience's fascination is going with
Mm-hmm.
horror, with slasher films, with voyeurism, with stalkers,
Mm-hmm.
and this is 12 years away from where he is right now in the Red Shoes, and he's
Mm-hmm.
playing in this beautiful fantasy, to the point where when he came back to what, quote unquote reality, it was too much for people.
Right.
It's remarkable.
They're like, you've wrecked our impression of you, basically.
Yeah, well, he was doing these incredible swooning, think about Black Narcissus, right? Which is a terrible, dark story.
It is, yeah.
Filmed in the most epic and beautiful way.
Yeah.
To use the contrast of the sort of the beauty of the natural world against the inner torment that these characters are going through.
Right.
And the Red Shoes, there's almost no naturalism to it. It's a stage musical, and it's kind of glorious that way. But it feels like, and I think this is the reason that people remember it so fondly, it feels like the kind of technicolor expressionism, for lack of a better term, that he's using here is his natural language. That this is the moment here in Hoffman and Black Narcissus where they found this language. They invented a cinematic language that just hadn't existed before, and they made 3 perfect films with it.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, I'm gonna have to check out some of their others, because I've seen Black Narcissus and The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, which I really found intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to catch up on some of this essential cinema.
I think almost all of them are on the Criterion Channel. Probably Peeping Tom isn't, but there's just been a BFI restoration. You can borrow my Blu-ray. It's like nothing else, though. It really is jarring, given how conventional Powell's earlier films were in the 40s, like even in the 30s, and then how fanciful they became. It's just God, I left out A Matter of Life and Death as part of the Technicolor language because I keep forgetting so much of it is in black and white. But I forget that it's in some of the best moments are in color. It really is this incredible legacy, and almost I think it would have been forgotten had it not been for Scorsese's championing of them in the 80s and 90s. the Film Foundation restorations of the films have been absolutely gorgeous. And he is another artist when you mentioned someone who plateaus and develops and plateaus and develops. Scorsese's like had 4 distinct periods of his career, maybe even 5 at this point, where he's found ways to tell stories that are uniquely his own, but also so completely universal that, I mean, something like Silence is a meditation on mortality and The Irishman too. They're films about getting older that only a man in his 80s could have made, I think, with the texture, but that I understand in my 50s. I absolutely connect with all of these concerns.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah. How, I guess with each stage of life, it almost, you're still speaking your own voice, or it is still sort of very much who they are, except it's just evolved to this later time in life. And I'm curious, like the life and death of Colonel Blimp, I found really fascinating in that it seems like how it starts, you think you're going to watch this movie all about war, but it's so much about like friendship and aging, which I found so fascinating in the film.
Yeah. And it makes me wish that I could have seen more from Powell as he got older.
What themes would have come up? Yeah.
There's the film he made with Helen Mirren and James Mason in '69, Age of Consent, which has it's sort of fallen away. Right now, the only reason people talk about it is because of the near constant nudity, which, the young Helen Mirren was the showcase of that film, basically. And not in a prurient way. It actually works for the story, but it's one of those things where you watch it and it's like, oh yeah, that's all anybody would talk about. But it's a really interesting story about an older artist and a young model, kind of similar in it's like a lighter seaside comedy version of La Belle Noiseuse that Rivette would make a few years later. But it's very similarly about the dynamics and the sort of romantic power plays that go on in the relationship. But again, completely unlike anything
they did earlier
in the earlier films. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
except that the themes are there, right?
Yeah, some of the themes are kind of there in the Red Shoes, that's interesting. Well, I'll have to do a whole retrospective in the coming weeks.
It's a good way to connect to a different type of cinema, right? Because there really is nothing else. And I've been trying for this entire conversation to figure out how to bring it around to Seagrass, because Seagrass has aspects of magic realism, sort of. There's stuff going on, but it's also a much more grounded and realistic world that all these things happen in. So how do you thread that needle?
I really didn't choose a film that made any sense in terms of my own work.
Totally fine.
We talked about I was like considering that one too, and I think that has a lot of more similarities to Seagrass in terms of structure and themes. But I thought I'd just, choose something really out there, just a wild card. I don't think it really does have a lot in common. But, the only thing that I can really think of and throughout this whole conversation is when we talked about the Red Shoes, and I thought a bit about the ghost because in Seagrass, only because I think it's a metaphor as well, but I think it also doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's real or not. And at the same time, it can be real and maybe unreal at the same time. And I think that's how I feel about the symbolism of the shoes and whether or not they are the ones that ultimately cause her to fall to her death or not.
Yeah. If you need it to be real, it can be.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you as a viewer can't possibly conceive of a film working without it, it's one of those weird little things. It's like the ghost that opens the door in The Shining. That has to be real. It's the one concrete moment where the supernatural and the natural world inarguably coexist, is that one moment. And then later when Wendy starts having visions of her own and we get led into the larger world. But the way Kubrick made the movie, other than that moment where the ghosts open the door and let Jack out of the freezer, there's nothing in there that can't be explained by his deterioration, that it works perfectly as a psychological story. Whereas in Seagrass, I had no... Is this a spoiler? I guess it's not really, because we're talking about ambivalence.
Yeah.
I had no doubt in my mind that was happening. That
the ghost was real.
Well, that something was there, that there was some sort of paranormal aspect to it. And it's simply because we see it through the kids, and the kids experience everything on a primal level, right? They're seeing what's really there. They're seeing what's really there in their parents' relationship before the parents realize it, which is why the film is so powerful.
I agree. I see it as real too. But I think, kind of going back to what you said a couple minutes ago, if you need it to be unreal, it can be too. And I think just the opposite, because I think that, and same with the red shoes, like if you need it to be unreal, it can be. It doesn't need to be the red shoes causing this. If you can't wrap your head around that psychologically, it can be the real emotions that are causing this as well. And I think it's the same with the ghost. It can be the real emotions that this feeling represents rather than an actual ghost itself. But I agree that it's real.
I thought so. Well, and above and beyond that, Sarah Gadon's in your movie, and she trained as a ballerina. Have you had the chance? I did not know that. What? Yes, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
She went to the National Ballet. I was just wondering if you'd ever had the chance to talk about I'm sure she's seen it. She's a cinephile.
Well, now I have to. Yeah. No, I did not know that, but that does not surprise me. I feel like she's probably great at any kind of artistic pursuit that she has. But yeah, now I'll be looking forward to talking to her about that.
Yeah, I'll see if we can get a Q&A going.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to brush up on all my ballet films. And to be honest, I don't know a lot about ballet. I'm not this person who watches all the dance films, but it's just this one that I find especially intriguing, actually.
Well, there isn't anything like it. I think I would wager every ballet movie since has tried to be the Red Shoes in some way, because it's a really simple narrative to digest, but to understand the texture of it and the psychological versus the philosophical and the conflicts that they structure over and over again within the movie. It's like an echo chamber of that one question. You're like, why do you, what was it? Why do you dance? Why do you live?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And would you die for it? But really it's not, I read this on Wikipedia too, actually, but it was a really good point, which is that, that's what I think Pressman was saying Powell, I'm putting together their two names, but I think that he was saying that he wanted to make a film that was about essentially, would she die for her art? But, it really wasn't actually that in the end. I don't think that was what the message ended up being. It was more about these two other people kind of making her die for her choices.
Ooh, that's a perfect out.
Okay.
That was perfect. Actually, chills.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Oh, I feel like I totally muddied what I was saying, but it was a button.
No. You stuck the landing. That was great.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Well, are you happy with this? Is there anything you wanted to get to that we didn't? It felt pretty.
No, I think we touched on everything. I hope I touched on the female perspective enough, but I think so.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot in there. It's like a confusing film to watch in a weird way, like the message around women, because a part of me, it was like, is this like a strange kind of bad message? But that's really, I think when you look at all of the layers, it's actually kind of the opposite, or it's both at once. So yeah, I found it really, I hope that I did that part justice, because that was what I was like really kind of swirling around in my head.
Yeah, I think so. It allows for Vicky to be fully realized, even as it sort of chips away at her.
Totally. That's what I mean.
All the stressors are external. Everything is coming at her from the outside. And so she ends up disintegrating, but it's not because of her weakness.
No,
I think that's what's really important. And that's the thing that so many other ballet movies forget. They need to treat dancers as delicate, so they make the women vulnerable in a way that they might not otherwise be, because you need to have a spine of steel to do this.
Yeah. And she does in many ways.
My thanks to Meredith Hama-Brown, whose excellent first feature, Seagrass, opens across North America this Friday, February 23rd. And in Toronto, if you come to the TIFF Lightbox for the 2:30 p.m. show on Sunday the 25th, Meredith and cinematographer Norm Lee will be joining me there for an intro and Q&A. It'll be worth it. Thanks also to Nicola Pender. She knows what she did. You can find Meredith on Instagram at Meredith Hama-Brown, all one word, and you can find the Red Shoes in 4K and Blu-ray special editions from the Criterion Collection, built around a glorious restoration. It's also streaming on the Criterion channel with an excellent archival commentary track and testimonials from Greta Gerwig and Brad Bird, and available to rent and buy on various VOD services across North America. Also, Criterion just announced a 4K edition of Peeping Tom. It's coming in May. Keep an eye peeled. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your new booster when you can. I'll see you next week.